Hey guys, I'm T and welcome to the channel. If you're new here, we make trendy and fun crochet tutorials twice a week, and if you haven't already, smash that like button, drop a comment down below, and subscribe to join in on the fun. For today's tutorial, we're making a long sleeve cutout top. I love a good cutout top, and with fall in full effect, you know we had to go with our longer sleeves to keep us warm and toasty, but we made sure to keep it cute. Speaking of, if you're looking for more cute crochet projects to keep the autumn angst away, you are in the right place. We have hundreds of easy to follow modern crochet tutorials and patterns with even more dropping twice weekly, so consider clicking the bell to subscribe and you'll never miss an upload. Also, do me a huge favor and give this video a big thumbs up if you like it, or 2 thumbs down if you don't. Either way, it's a great way to show support so I can keep putting out free tutorials every Wednesday and Sunday. Now, it's time to get on the show, so without further ado. For this project, any category 4 yarn will work, but I used a total of 295 grams of yarn. That's 650 yards if you're stateside. As for tools, a 5.5mm hook, scissors, stitch markers, and a tape measure. There is a written pattern down below. Use offer code TCDDIY for a discount off any $9.99 plus order, and enter this week's pattern giveaway by telling us if you sing or think in the shower. I very quietly sing to myself. We're using 3 stitches for this project, and they'll be as follows. Chain, slip stitch, single crochet, and half double crochet. This tutorial is made for a size small. You can adjust it for your size, and we explain how to in the video, so let's get started. Getting this top started, we're all going to grab our category 4 yarn and make a slip knot. Then we're all going to grab our 5.5mm hook and start off by making a chain that starts 1 inch underneath our underarm down to where like the bottom of this top to be, so you can make this cropped or full length. I'd like for mine to be full length, so I'm going to start by making a chain 60. That's just about 13.5 inches or 34 centimeters, and I actually already have this portion all completed, so I'm just going to be doing a small sample size with you. Now that we have our chain, we're all going to block off that last chain and do a chain 2. That chain 2 doesn't count as a stitch, that's our turning chain. Then we're going to do a half double crochet row. So yarn over, into that chain that we blocked off, or the 3rd chain from our hook, we're going to insert, yarn over, pull through, yarn over, pull through 3. That is our first half double crochet. Continue with 1 half double crochet into every chain, leaving the last one. We made our way down with our row 1. We've all left that last chain, and into that last chain we're all going to do an increase of 2 half double crochets. So starting with a yarn over, into that last chain with our first half double, into that same last chain with a second half double crochet. Now at the end of our row 1, we should have 1 more stitch than chains that we made. Now getting started on our row 2, which is going to be a slip stitch row, we're all going to chain 1, flip our work. Now they're all going to be within the back loop, so finding that first stitch from our previous row, we're going to insert into that back loop, or the loop that's furthest away from us, yarn over, and gently pull through both loops on our hook. We want to make sure that we're not tugging too tightly, otherwise the following row will be too tight to work into. Again, into that following, insert into that back loop, pull through everything, and continue with 1 back loop slip stitch into every stitch. We are back and our first 2 rows are complete. Now from here, it's going to be a repeat of our 2 previous rows, all worked within the back loops until we have a portion that can reach from mid-underarm over to the corner of our underarm. Now my underarm portion, this section, is actually complete, but I'm just going to get started on the following row with y'all just to make sure we all have it down. So to get started on our odd number row, we're going to chain 2 and flip. Start with 1 back loop half double into every stitch. So we're all going to yarn over. Into that last stitch's back loop, we're going to insert, pull through, yarn over, pull through 3. From here, continue with 1 back loop half double into every stitch, leaving the last one. We are at the end of our row 3. We all should have left that last stitch. Now into that last stitch, we're all going to do an increase of 2 back loop halves. So starting with the yarn over, into that last stitch, insert with 1 half, then into that same back loop with a second half. Now, like I said, we're going to continue to repeat our 2 previous rows. Once we have this underarm portion completed, I will meet y'all back right after an even number row, so that is a slip stitch row. Then we can finish up our underarm portion together. Now from here, we're going to continue to repeat those 2 previous rows until we have a portion, like I said, that can reach over to the corner of our underarm. Now I'm complete right after my first 2 rows. That's just about a ½ inch or 1 centimeter, and that is unstretched because remember this will have a decent amount of stretch to it. But once we have our last row, which is our slip stitch row completed, we will meet back and then we're going to finish up with the rest of our underarm portion. Now for the rest of our underarm portion, what we're going to do is the same back loop half and back loop slip stitch rows, but we are going to be doing more of an increase along the top just so we can get a smooth curve leading up to our shoulder. So since we all should have ended right after a slip stitch row, I'm going to chain 2, flip our work. We're all going to be putting 1 back loop half into every stitch, leaving that last one again, so now we can all do an increase of 3. Now using my small sample size, we've made our way up with our back loop halves. Into that last stitch, we're all going to do an increase of 3 back loop halves, so there's 1. Into that same back loop with a second, same back loop with a third. Now we are going to need to increase into our slip stitch row as well, so how that's going to work is start with a chain 2. That first chain will count as a stitch for that following row. That second chain will act as our turning chain. Then we're going to flip our work, then into the second chain from our hook, insert with our first slip stitch. So into that chain, we're going to insert, yarn over, pull through everything on our hook. We still want to make sure that we're pulling through gently just to make sure that the following row isn't too tight to work into. Then from here, continue with 1 back loop slip stitch into every stitch. So we now have the first 2 rows for this underarm portion that curves up to our shoulder completed. From here, it is going to be a repeat of our 2 previous rows until we now have a portion that can reach from mid-underarm, making sure that it can stretch all the way over to the front of our body, so roughly where a bra strap or tank top strap would lay. And once when the second underarm portion is completed, I will meet everyone back right after an odd number row, so that is a half double crochet row, so we can work straight into the shoulder together from there. As you guys can see, I have already completed my complete underarm portion. I have a total of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 rows completed. Now this width is roughly 1.5 inches or 4 centimeters unstretched. Now from here, we can all do the shoulder portion together, but I'm going to be showing you how to do that with our small sample size. Now, like I said, once we have the entirety of our underarm portion completed, we're now going to get started on the shoulder. So first things first, we're all going to place our work up to ourselves, making sure that our tail end stays roughly 1 inch underneath our underarm. We do want to make sure that we're not placing this too high or too low, because if it's too tall, our armhole can be a little too tight, or if it's too low, it can make our armhole way too big. So making sure that this is in place, we're going to make a chain that reaches the top of our shoulder. I needed roughly 5 inches or 13 centimeters, so I went ahead and made a chain 17, and we're going to be doing the shoulder portion with our sample size. So now that we have our chain, we're all going to block off that last chain and do a chain 1. That chain 1 doesn't count as a stitch, that's our turning chain. Then into the chain that we blocked off, or the second chain from our hook, we're going to insert with a slip stitch, making sure that we're still not tugging too tightly. From here, continue with 1 slip stitch into every chain. Once we reach the body, 1 back loop slip stitch into every stitch, and I'll meet you back at the end of the row. So now that our first slip stitch row is complete, now we're just going to repeat our back loop half double and back loop slip stitch rows with no increases and no decreases. So what we're going to do is chain 2, flip our work, 1 back loop half into every stitch, then at the end of that row, chain 1, flip our work, 1 back loop slip into every stitch. We're going to continue on with those 2 rows until we now have a portion, remembering to stretch it as if we're wearing it, until we have a portion that can reach over from mid-underarm all the way over to the side of the base of our neck. Then I'll meet everyone back right after an even number row, so that is along the bottom, then we can get started on the neckline together from there. So now that our shoulder is completed, we can get started on our neckline. But just to let y'all know, I have a total of 14 rows. My width is just about 3.5 inches or 9 centimeters unstretched, and now what we're going to do is place our work up to ourselves and insert our stitch marker into the stitch that we have that's right underneath our collarbone. Now for me, that's just about 2 inches or 5 centimeters, so I inserted my stitch marker into the 10th stitch from the top. Now since we're all along the bottom, we're going to get started on the following row, so chain 2 and flip. Put 1 back loop half into every stitch, leaving 3 stitches right before our stitch marker, and I'll meet you back. So we've made our way up, leaving our last 3 stitches right before our stitch marker, and now we're all going to do a decrease of 3 back loop halves. So how we're going to do that is yarn over. Into that third to last back loop, we're going to insert and pull through. Into that second to last, insert, pull through. Then into that last, pull through. Should have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 loops on our hook. Then yarn over, pull through all 5. Now our falling row is going to be a slip stitch row, no increases and no decreases. So simply chain 1, flip our work, put 1 back loop slip into every stitch. Then just to do our decrease together once more, at the end of the row, chain 2 flip, put 1 back loop half into every stitch, making our way up, leaving the last 3 stitches, and I'll meet you guys back once more. So we are back. We have just completed our slip stitch row and have also made our way up with our half double crochet row, leaving the last 3 stitches. And now we're going to do another decrease of 3 back loop halves together. So how that's going to work is yarn over. Into that third to last, insert pull through, second to last, pull through, and last back loop. Pull through for a total of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 loops on our hook. Yarn over, pull through all 5. Now all we're going to do from here is continue to repeat our 2 previous rows until we now have a portion that reaches just about 1 inch away from mid-chest. Now we do want to make sure that we're still stretching it as if we're wearing it, but I will meet everyone back right after a back loop slip stitch row, so along the bottom, then we can do the middle rows together. So we are back. The decreased portion of our neckline is complete. I now have a total of 18 rows. My width is just about 4.5 inches or 11 centimeters unstretched. Now we're going to do our few middle rows. So first things first, we're all going to want to put this up to ourselves and we're going to insert our stitch marker into the stitch where we'd like the depth of the cutout to be. Now if you guys would like to show a little bit more, insert your stitch marker lower, or if you would like to cover a little bit more, insert your stitch marker higher. I inserted my stitch marker into the 20th stitch from the top, and that is counting from my last row. That's just about 4 inches or 10 centimeters. And now to get started on the following row, we're going to chain 2 and flip since we should all be along the bottom. Put 1 back loop half into every stitch until our stitch marker is reached. So now that we've made our way up with our back loop half double crochet row, all we're going to do is our following back loop slip stitch row. So these few middle rows aren't going to have any increases or decreases. So from where we're at, chain 1, flip our work, put 1 back loop slip into every stitch. Then continue to repeat these 2 previous rows until we now have a portion that can reach past mid-chest till we're about 1 inch over. Then I'll meet you guys back right after half double crochet row, so that is along the top, then we can get started on the following portion of our neckline together. We are back. My middle rows are complete. I now have a total of 23 rows. We all should have ended along the top. Now what we're all going to do from here is make a chain for the same amount of stitches that we skipped when we got started on this cutout detail. Now for those of you that have my numbers, I skipped a total of 20 stitches, so I went ahead and made a chain 20. Now from here we're going to do the following row. So chain 1 and flip, and start with 1 slip stitch into that chain that we blocked off with a second chain from our hook. From here, put 1 slip stitch into every chain, then 1 back loop slip stitch into every stitch, then I'll meet you back at the end of the row. So we are back. Our first row is complete. Now we're just going to mirror everything we have on this side, so just to get started on the following row, since we're along the bottom, chain 2 and flip. Put 1 back loop half into every stitch, leaving that last stitch, and then I'll meet you guys back so we can do our increase together. So we've just made our way all the way up with our half double crochet row. We should have all left that last stitch. Now into that last stitch, so that we can mirror this side over here, we're all going to do an increase of 3 back loop halves. So into that last stitch, insert into that back loop with 1 half, same back loop with a second half, same back loop with a third, and that's it. Our following row is going to be a slip stitch row with no increases and no decreases. From here, all we're going to do is continue to repeat our 2 previous rows until we have the same amount of rows as these decreased rows that we have over here. Once we do, I'll meet you guys back so we can get started on the shoulder together from there. So we are back. Our neckline is now complete. Now my total width is just about 6 inches or 15 centimeters unstretched. Now we're going to do our shoulder together. So since we all should have ended along the top, what we're going to do is make a chain for the same amount of stitches that we skipped when we got started on our neckline. So for those of you that have my numbers, I skipped a total of 10 stitches. So over here, I made a chain 10. Then from here, all we're going to do is back loop slip, back loop half double crochet rows with no increases, no decreases for the same amount of rows that we have for our first shoulder portion. So the following row is going to be a slip stitch row. So put 1 slip stitch into every chain, 1 back loop slip stitch into every stitch. Following row is a back loop half, and I'll meet you guys back once when our second shoulder portion is completed. And just as a really quick tip, we should have the same amount of stitches as our first shoulder portion. We are back and my second shoulder portion is complete. Now the total width that I have is just about 8 inches or 20 centimeters unstretched. Now we're going to get started on our underarm portion. Now just like how this underarm portion was done in 2 sections, this one will be completed in 2 sections as well. We're all going to insert our stitch marker into the same amount of chains that we made that led up to our shoulder. So for those of you that have my numbers, I made a chain 17. So along this side, from the top, I inserted my stitch marker into the 17th stitch. Then from here, since we should all be along the bottom, is put one back loop half double crochet into every stitch, leaving 3 stitches right before our stitch marker. So we're back, we've made our way up with our back loop half double crochet row. Into that third to last stitch, we're going to insert, pull through. Into that second to last, inserting into that back loop, pull through, and into that last, pull through for a total of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 loops on our hook. Then yarn over, pull through 5, and we just did a decrease of 3 back loop halves because on this side, we did an increase of 3 back loop halves. Now on the other side, we did do an increase into our slip stitch row, so we're going to have to start the following row off with a decrease. So chain 1 and flip. Then start by inserting our hook into that first stitch's back loop, pull through, next stitch's back loop. Then once we have these 3 loops on our hook, yarn over, pull through all 3. After that decrease, we're going to be putting 1 back loop slip into the rest of our stitches. From here, we're going to continue to repeat those 2 previous rows until we have the same amount of rows as the second half of our first underarm portion. It should be an odd number of rows. Then I'll meet you guys back right after that last row, which should be a half double crochet for everyone. Then we can complete our underarm portion. The first half of our underarm portion is complete. My total width is 9 inches or 23 centimeters. Now we're going to finish up with the rest of our underarm. Now for the finishing portion of our underarm, our slip stitch rows aren't going to have any increases or decreases. So from where we're at, chain 1, flip our work. Put 1 back loop slip into every stitch. Then the following row is going to be a back loop half double crochet row. So at the end of that slip stitch row, chain 2, flip our work, put 1 back loop half into every stitch, leaving the last 2 stitches, and I'll meet you back to do that decrease together. So our slip stitch row with no increases and no decreases is complete, and we made our way up with our following half double crochet row, leaving the last 2 stitches. Now we're just going to do a decrease of 2 back loop halves together. So we're all going to start with a yarn over and insert our hook into that second to last back loop, pull through, then into that last stitch's back loop, pull through for 4 loops on our hook, then yarn over, pull through all 4, and that's it. From here, continue to repeat these 2 previous rows until we have the same amount of underarm rows as the first section that we did together. When we have the same amount of rows, do a chain of 1 and cut. So we are back. I've just completed the entirety of my front panel. Now my total width is roughly 9.5 inches or 25 centimeters unstretched, and now we're going to do the back panel together. And the back panel is actually going to be done exactly the same way as the front panel, but without all the cutouts in the middle. So just to talk you guys through it, we're all going to start by making a chain for the same amount of underarm chains that we made as the front panel. We're going to do the same underarm rows. Then make the same chain that led all the way up to the shoulders. Then we're going to do our back loop half, back loop slip stitch rows with no increases, no decreases for the same amount of rows that we have from our first shoulder row all the way across to our last shoulder row. Then we're going to do our same underarm portion that we just completed together and do a chain up a 1 and cut. Then I'll meet you guys back so we can seam everything together. So now that we have both front and back panel completed, we're going to seam up our shoulders. So first things first, we're going to make sure that our work is flipped wrong side out, meaning the ribbing that we have for both the front and the back panel is faced in towards each other. Then we're going to insert our hook into the top corner stitch of the front and back panel. We're going to insert our yarn onto our hook, pull through, and do a chain up of 1 to secure. And all we're going to do is put 1 single crochet into every side row, working in through both the front and back panel at the same time. So finding our first side row, everyone's side row should be a side slip stitch row. We're going to find that top loop within the front, same top loop within the back, and insert with 1 single crochet. Again, into that next side row within the front should be a side half, insert. Next side row within the back should be a side half as well, insert with 1 single crochet. And that's it. From here, we're going to continue on with this, making our way all the way down till we don't have any more front panel rows left to work into. When we don't, do a chain up of 1 and cut, and repeat on the other side. So we are back. We have just completed seaming up the shoulders. Now we're going to seam up the sides. So first things first, we're going to make sure that our work is flipped right side out now, because the outside loop slip stitch seam that we're about to do is going to look like another back loop slip stitch row. Then we're going to insert our hook into the bottom corner stitch of both the front and the back panel, insert our yarn onto our hook, pull through, do a chain up of 1 to secure. Then finding that first stitch into the front panel, we're going to insert only into that front loop. First stitch into the back panel, insert only into that back loop, then yarn over, pull through all 3 loops. Again, next stitch into the front panel, insert only into that front loop. Next stitch into the back panel, insert only into that back loop, then yarn over, pull through all 3, and that's it. From here, we're going to continue doing this, making our way all the way up. When we don't have any more stitches left to work into, do a chain up of 1 and cut, then repeat on the other side. So we are back. We are now going to get started on our neckline. So first things first, we're all going to start by making sure that our work is flipped right side out, right side up. Then I'm going to insert our hook into any one of the stitches that we have along our neckline. Then we're going to do a single crochet / chain to connect this gap. So since I've inserted my hook into the stitch that I have that's nearest to my shoulder seam, I'm going to work my way down, starting with one single crochet into every stitch. Once we're working into our side rows, and it will be the same for the few side rows we have within the front and for the back, it's going to be 2 single crochets into every side half, 1 single crochet into every side slip. So I'll meet you guys back once when I reach my first side row, and then we can do those few side rows together. We are back. I have reached my first side row, and we are going to do those few side rows together. So my first side row is a side half double crochet row. Now from here, I'm going to insert with 2 single crochets. So finding that top loop, I'm going to insert, starting with 1, into that same top loop with a second. Now everyone's following side row should be a side slip stitch row. So find that top loop and insert with just 1. Let's do the following 2 rows together because that's pretty much all I have left. My following side row is the side half, insert with 2. So there's 1, same top loop with a second. Then my next side row is a side slip, so find that top loop and insert with just 1. We're going to continue doing this until we reach the corner stitch of our front panel. Then we're all going to make a chain that reaches the corner stitch of the other front panel. So how we're going to make sure that we have the correct amount of chains is we're going to take a look at the amount of rows that we have for our cutout. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 rows right here. Now we're going to be counting the amount of rows, giving 2 single crochets for every side half, 1 single crochet for every side slip. So basically the same way that we just did our single crochet row on top of our side rows. So since I have 5 rows right here, I'm going to count mine out together. We're going to count 1, 2 for our first side half double, 3 for our first side slip, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So I will be doing a total of 8 chains. And now that we have our chain, we're going to single crochet it into the top corner stitch of the front panel that we have here. That single crochet is going to count as our connection and also as our first stitch. So into this top corner stitch, find that top loop and insert with just 1 single. Now it's connected. Now into my following side row, we're going to insert with 2 half doubles, and we're just going to continue on with that, making our way all the way up and around. Then once we don't have any more stitches left to work into, slip stitch into that chain space. And just as a really quick tip, this single crochet row is going to be as wide as this portion can stretch. So once it's completed, try our piece on. If it's a little too tight, we do some stitches with a looser grip, or if it's too loose, we do some stitches with a tighter grip. We are back. Our single crochet row along our neckline is complete. Now from here, we're going to get started on the width of our collar. So right after we've slip stitched into that chain space, we're all going to start by making a chain the length that we'd like for the collar to be. I'd like for mine to be just about 1 inch or 2 centimeters, so I went ahead and made a chain 5. Then we're going to do a slip stitch row. So we're all going to start by blocking off that last chain and do a chain 1. That chain 1 doesn't count as a stitch, that's our turning chain. Then into that chain that we blocked off, or the second chain from our hook, we're all going to insert with a slip stitch. Now from here, continue on with 1 slip stitch into every chain. Now that we put 1 slip stitch into every chain, we're going to connect it into the base. So finding that next available stitch into the base, we're going to insert in through there with a slip stitch. Now that slip stitch doesn't actually count as a stitch, that's just to connect. Then to work our way up to the following row, we're going to slip stitch into that following stitch into the base, so this one right here, flip our work, and now put 1 back loop slip stitch into every stitch. So making sure that we're not working into any of those slip stitches into the base, we're going to insert into that back loop with 1 back loop slip, then make our way all the way down with 1 back loop slip into every stitch. At the end of the row, chain 1, flip our work, and put 1 back loop slip stitch into every stitch again, and then I'll meet you back at the end of our row 3. We've made our way down, and our first 3 rows for our collar are complete. Now we're going to connect it into the base just once more. So finding that next available stitch into the base, insert with a slip stitch. Doesn't count as a stitch, that's just to connect. Then to work our way up to the following row, slip stitch into that following stitch into the base, flip our work, and repeat. From here, we're going to continue to repeat our 2 previous rows, making our way all the way around. When we don't have any more stitches left to work into, I'll meet you back so we can seam it all together. So we've made our way all the way around, and I have seamed it, and it is going to be the same seam that we did for the sides. So the same outside loop slip stitch seam. To do this one, we're going to make sure that our work is flipped right side out, right side up, then do our same outside loop slip stitch seam as our sides, do a chain up 1 and cut, then I'll meet you back. So we are back. We have just completed seaming everything together. Now what we're all going to do from here is get started on our sleeve. So first things first, we're all going to make sure that our work is flipped right side out, right side up. Then we're going to insert our hook into the stitch that we have that's nearest to our side seam within the armhole. Then, making sure that we're working clockwise or to the left, we're going to do a single crochet row. So we're all going to start with a chain 1 to secure, then put 2 single crochets into every side half double crochet row, then skip over our side slip stitch rows. So getting this started, our first side row is a half double crochet row. So find that top loop and insert with 2 single crochets. So there is 1 into that same top loop with a second single crochet. Now we are going to skip over our side slip stitch row and into the top of that following side half double with 2 single crochets again, and we're going to continue doing this, making our way up our armhole. So we've just made our way up our armhole with 2 singles into every side half double. Now before we get started on the following section, we do want to make sure that we remember the amount of stitches that we have for this underarm portion. So for those of you that have my numbers, I have a total of 6 stitches. I'm going to file that away for now. From here, just continue on with our single crochet row, making our way all the way up and over. Once we reach this underarm portion, again, 2 single crochets into every side half double, skipping over our side slips, then slip stitch into that chain space, and I'll meet you back. So our first single crochet row is complete. Our following row is going to be a single and half double crochet row. So right after we have slip stitched into that chain space, we're all going to chain 1. Making sure that we're working in the same direction as our previous row, we're going to start with 1 single crochet into every stitch for the same amount of stitches that we have for the underarm portion. So for those of you that have my numbers, I did a total of 6 stitches for my underarm portion, so I will be doing a total of 6. So now that we have our single crochets, we're now going to be putting 1 half double crochet into every stitch, leaving the same amount of stitches that we just did together. So all we're going to do is into that following stitch, insert with a half, then make your way all the way up and over. I'm going to leave the last 6 stitches and then I will meet you guys back. So we've just made our way up and over with our half double crochets. I did leave my last 6 stitches. Now the 6 stitches is because we had a total of 6 stitches over our underarm, and I just put 1 single crochet into each of those stitches and completed my row with a slip stitch into that chain space. Now from here, our following row is going to be a back loop slip stitch row to match the ribbing of the body. So right after we slip stitch in that chain space, we're all going to chain 1, flip our work, making sure that we are flipping our work to keep up with the ribbing, and just put 1 slip stitch into every back loop. Then I'll meet you back at the end of our row 3. Our row 3 is completed. Now we're going to get started on our following row. So our following row is now going to be a single crochet row with a half double crochet towards the top, pretty much the same way that we did our row 2, but in between the singles and half doubles are going to be a decrease. So right after we've slip stitched in that chain space, we're all going to chain 1, flip our work. Start with 1 back loop single crochet for the same amount of stitches that we had for our underarm portion. So for me, I'm going to be doing 6 back loop singles, then I'll meet you guys back. My back loop singles are complete. Now right after the back loop singles, we're all going to do a decrease of 2 back loop singles as well. So into that following stitch, we're going to insert into that back loop, pull through, next stitch is back loop, pull through for 3 loops on our hook, then yarn over, pull through all 3 loops. From here, continue with 1 back loop half double crochet into every stitch, making our way up and over, leaving the same amount of stitches that we did over our underarm, plus an additional 2 so that we can do our decrease together. So I will meet you guys back when I have a total of 8 stitches left. I've just made my way up and over with my back loop half double crochets, leaving my last few stitches. Now all we're going to do is a decrease of 2 back loop single crochets, then close off the row with 1 back loop single into the rest of our stitches, then slip stitch into that chain space, and I'll meet you back. So now that we have 4 rows completed, we're just going to continue to repeat these 2 previous rows until we now have a portion that is nice and snug on our arm. So really we're just doing this until we get the fit of the sleeve that we want. We do want this to be a slimmer sleeve, so just make sure that we're not making this too tight, otherwise it could be a little bit hard to put on. But once we have that completed, I will meet you guys back right after a slip stitch row, then we can continue on with the length. So we are back. I have just completed the first portion of my sleeve. I have a total of 11 rows. This length is just about 2 inches or 5 centimeters. Now from here, we're going to continue on with our 2 previous rows, but now without any decreases until we have a portion that can lay completely horizontal on our arm. So we all should have ended right after an odd number row. What we're all going to do from here is chain 1, flip our work. Start with 1 back loop single crochet for the same amount of stitches that we did for our underarm portion. So for me, that's 6 back loop singles. Then 1 back loop half double crochet into every stitch. Then we're going to make sure that we're closing off the row with the same amount of back loop single crochets that we have for our underarm portion, so 6 back loop single crochets. Then our falling row is going to be a back loop slip stitch row, no increases and no decreases. So I'm just going to get those 2 falling rows together and then I'll meet you back. So we are back. We have just completed our single crochet row, that is single crochets and half double crochets in the same row with no increases and no decreases, and our falling slip stitch row as well, again with no increases and no decreases. From here we're going to continue to repeat these 2 previous rows until we now have a portion that can lay completely horizontal on our arm once when it's worn. Then I'll meet you guys back right after a slip stitch row, then we can get on with the length of our sleeve together from there. Alright, so we are back. We have just completed the evening out rows for our sleeve. Now I have a total of 25 rows. This length is just about 4.5 inches or 11 centimeters. Now from here we're going to do our half double crochet row with our back loop slip stitch row with no increases and no decreases until we reach roughly where our elbow is. So we should have all ended right after a back loop slip stitch row. What we're going to do is chain 2, flip our work, put 1 back loop half into every stitch, then slip stitch into that second chain that we made. Then to get started on the falling slip stitch row, chain 1, flip our work, 1 back loop slip into every stitch. Like I said, we're going to continue to repeat those 2 rows until we reach roughly where our elbow is, or depending on your sleeve, roughly where we need it to start to cinch in just a little bit. So maybe for you that would be forearm or something like that. But either way, I'll meet you guys back right after a back loop slip stitch row. I'll show you guys how we're going to do our decrease, then I'll let you complete the rest of your sleeve together from there. We are back and my sleeve length is nearly complete. Now we're going to do just a few decreases. So just to let you guys know, I have a total of 53 rows. This length is just about 13 inches or 33 centimeters. Now I'm going to show you guys how we're going to do our decrease row. It's going to be within the half double crochet rows only, and then you guys are going to implement it wherever you guys need. So getting started on our first decrease row, we're all going to chain 2 and flip. So just to do our decrease row together, we're going to start and end the row off with a decrease of 2 back loop halves. So into that first stitch's back loop, we're going to insert, pull through, next stitch's back loop, insert, pull through for a total of 4 loops on our hook, yarn over, pull through all 4. Then put 1 back loop half into every stitch, leaving the last 2 stitches, and I'll meet you back. We've made our way around with our back loop half doubles, leaving the last 2 stitches. Now we're going to close off the row with a decrease of 2 back loop halves. So starting with a yarn over, insert your hook into that second to last back loop, pull through into that last back loop, pull through, yarn over, pull through 4, then slip stitch into that second chain that we made. Our falling row is going to be a slip stitch row with no increases and no decreases. So chain 1, flip our work, 1 back loop slip into every stitch. And then from here, all we're going to do is just continue to do our back loop half, back loop slip stitch rows until we get the total length of the sleeve that we want, until we're ready to do our cuff. And you guys can go ahead and implement this decrease row into any half double crochet row that you would like. That is completely up to you and the size that you want for your sleeve. Now in the next clip, I'll let y'all know how many rows I had and where I decreased. But the length of the sleeve needs to end right after a slip stitch row. Now the entire length of my sleeve is complete. I have a total of 71 rows. This length is just about 18 inches or 46 centimeters. And just to let you guys know, I did do my decreases into just my 54th and 58th row. Everything else was just normal back loop half double, back loop slip stitch rows with no increases or decreases. Now, once we have this completed, we are going to get started on our cuff. So our cuff is going to start with a back loop single crochet row, since we all should have ended right after a back loop slip stitch row. So what we're going to do is chain 1, flip our work, put 1 back loop single crochet into every stitch, then I'll meet you back. So now that our back loop single crochet row is complete, we're now going to get started on our cuff. Now I'm just going to talk you guys through it because the cuff is actually going to be done exactly the same way as the collar. So once we've slip stitched into that chain space, we're all going to start by making a chain the height that we'd like for the cuff to be. I'd like for mine to be just about 2 inches or 5 centimeters, so I'm going to start by making a chain 10. Then just do our back loop slip stitch rows with no increases, no decreases, making our way all the way around. When we don't have any more stitches left, I'll meet you back so we can seam it all together. And now that we've made our way all the way around with our slip stitch cuff, we're going to seam it. Now the seam is going to be done exactly the same way as the collar and the side seam, so another outside loop slip stitch seam. So just to talk you guys through it, we're going to make sure that our work is flipped right side out, then do our same outside loop slip stitch seam till we don't have any more stitches left to work into. When we don't, do a chain up of 1 and cut, then repeat on the other side. So now that both of our sleeves are completed, the last thing we're going to do is clean up our cutout. So that's going to be fairly simple. I'm just going to talk you guys through it. We're all going to start by inserting our hook into the stitch that we have that the front panel is coming out of from the collar. Then put 1 single crochet into every stitch, working into our top rows, just 2 single crochets into every side half double, so skipping over our side slip stitch rows the same way that we worked into our underarm portion. Work our way up with 1 single crochet into every stitch, then slip stitch into that next available stitch that we have into the collar. Then do a chain up of 1 and cut. And now that that is completed, we are all done. The last thing we have to do is just weave in all of our ends. And there you have it, y'all. Hope you enjoyed the tutorial. Join us on Instagram, Pinterest, or Twitter. Those links are down below. And don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Catch you on the next one. Bye!